Caroline had always been someone who enjoyed the small things in life: fresh flowers in a vase, sunlight streaming through her kitchen window, the smell of fruit from the local market. That morning had been one of those days when everything felt ordinary yet comforting. She had returned from the farmer's market with a basket of fruits, her favorite being the melons that reminded her of childhood summers. She placed them on the counter, humming to herself as she arranged everything neatly. The house was unusually quiet. Her husband was away on a business trip, and the only other person at home was Daniel, her stepson. He was 21, polite, and often kept to himself. He had always seemed reserved since his father remarried, still adjusting to the changes that life had forced on him. Caroline respected that, giving him space, never pressing too hard. Yet she had always admired his quiet strength, the way he helped around the house without being asked, the way he carried responsibility even at his young age as she lifted the melons from the basket. She held them close to her chest and laughed at how heavy they were. These farmers must be feeding them magic water, she joked softly to herself. She didn't realize that Daniel had entered the kitchen until she turned slightly and caught him in her peripheral vision. He froze for a moment, his gaze caught not on the fruit but on her. The moment was fleeting, but Caroline noticed it. His eyes widened briefly, then darted away as if he had looked too long at something forbidden. He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit she had seen before, and quickly shifted his attention to the table as though studying the wood grain was suddenly the most important thing in the world. Caroline's laughter faded, and her heartbeat quickened. She hadn't expected him to look at her that went with disrespect. Not with rudeness, but with something she couldn't quite name. It was a mixture of surprise, admiration, and something deeper. Something that unsettled her. "Did you need something, Daniel?" she asked, her voice gentle, trying to smooth over the tension that had sprung up like an unexpected storm cloud. He shook his head quickly, his voice slightly uneven when he answered, "No, just checking if you needed help carrying anything." Caroline smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's sweet, but I've got it under control." She turned back to the counter, placing the melons down carefully. But inside she felt a stir she didn't want to admit. She told herself it was nothing, just an awkward glance, a misunderstanding. Daniel lingered in the doorway for a few seconds longer before retreating, leaving Caroline standing in the kitchen with her thoughts. She pressed her palms against the counter, her eyes fixed on the fruit before her. She told herself not to read too much into it, not to let her imagination run wild. Still, her heart was unsettled, beating faster than it should have for such an ordinary moment as the day went on. Caroline tried to push the memory aside. She cooked lunch, cleaned the living room, watered the plants, all while telling herself that nothing unusual had happened. But no matter how much she distracted herself, the image of Daniel's startled expression kept replaying in her mind. It wasn't a look she could easily forget. Later, when she passed by his room, she noticed the door was closed. He rarely shut it completely. She wondered if he was hiding from her, if he was embarrassed about what had happened in the kitchen. Caroline felt a pang of guilt. She didn't want him to feel uncomfortable in his own home. He was young, still figuring himself out, still carrying the weight of having lost the simple family life he once had. She knew that emotions at that age could be confusing, unpredictable. She leaned against the hallway wall, her thoughts spiraling faster than she liked. She wasn't supposed to feel this way either. She was the adult, the one who had promised stability and safety when she married his father. And yet, something about that brief exchange had unsettled her in a way she couldn't deny. That night, as she lay in bed, the silence of the house felt heavier than usual. Her husband's absence made the rooms feel too large, too empty, and Daniel's quietness added to the weight of it all. She closed her eyes, trying to chase away the image of his eyes, widening when he saw her holding the melons. It was such a small thing, but it had unlocked a shift she wasn't ready for. The next morning, she entered the kitchen again, the fruit still sitting on the counter. The memory of Daniel's glance came rushing back. She sighed deeply, shaking her head at herself. "It was nothing," she whispered aloud, as though saying it would make it true. But deep down, Caroline knew that something had changed in that simple moments, something unspoken, something both fragile and dangerous. And though she tried to bury it, she couldn't escape the truth. Her heart had skipped in a way it hadn't in years. And Daniel's eyes had awakened questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. That single moment in the kitchen, the weight of the melons in her arms, the startled look in his eyes, the silence that followed had opened a door she didn't know existed. A door that once unlocked would be impossible to close again. The days after that kitchen moment were not the same. Caroline noticed it right away. Daniel, who had always been polite but casual, now carried himself differently around her. He spoke less, kept his answers short, and avoided meeting her eyes for too long. When he did look at her, his gaze darted away almost instantly, as if he was afraid of what she might see in them. It wasn't anger, it wasn't disrespect, it was something else. Something unspoken. Caroline told herself not to overthink it, but she couldn't ignore the change. The air between them felt heavier, filled with something invisible. She tried to act normal, to treat him the same way she always had. But there was no denying the quiet tension building day by day. One evening, as she stood outside watering her flowers, Daniel appeared at the edge of the yard. He hadn't been asked, but he came over and picked up the watering can, almost as if he needed to do something with his hands. "You shouldn't carry heavy things," he said softly, his eyes focused on the plants instead of her. His voice was calm, but there was an undertone of concern. Caroline froze for a moment, caught off guard by his words. It was such a small thing, but it carried a weight she hadn't expected. She smiled gently, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You sound like your father," she teased lightly, hoping to break the tension. But Daniel didn't laugh. He only looked at her briefly, his eyes serious, then quickly turned away again. She felt her heart beat faster. It wasn't just his words. It was the way he said them, the protective tone, the maturity behind it. For a moment, she forgot he was only 21. He stood tall, his presence steady, almost as though he was someone she could lean on if she let herself. That thought startled her. She pushed it away. But it lingered in her mind long after he went back inside. The following days only deepened the quietness between them. Carolyn would find herself noticing small details she hadn't before, the way Daniel's voice dropped when he was nervous, the way he always moved aside so she could pass first, the way his eyes lingered just a little too long before he caught himself. Each detail pulled at her in ways she tried to ignore. Carolyn, too, began to feel unsure. She caught herself hesitating before stepping into the kitchen when she knew Daniel might be there. She avoided certain conversations, worried her voice might reveal too much. It was a delicate dance, both of them moving carefully around each other, pretending nothing had changed when in truth everything had. One Saturday afternoon, Caroline decided to bake. She thought it might ease the strange silence if she filled the house with the smell of something warm and familiar. She was in the middle of mixing when Daniel walked in. He stopped by the counter, clearly unsure if he should stay. "You can taste test if you like," Caroline said lightly, trying to sound casual. He hesitated, then nodded, stepping closer. Their hands brushed when she passed him a spoon. It was a simple accident, but the moment jolted them both. Caroline pulled back quickly, her chest tightening, while Daniel kept his gaze fixed on the bowl, pretending he hadn't felt it. But the silence that followed said otherwise. Caroline wanted to say something, anything to ease the tension, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she busied herself with the batter, forcing herself to focus on the recipe. But deep inside, she knew the silence wasn't going away, was growing, pressing against them, waiting to be acknowledged. That night, as she sat in the living room reading, she heard Daniel's footsteps in the hallway. He paused near the doorway as if he wanted to say something, but then changed his mind and walked away. Caroline lowered her book, staring at the empty space where he had stood. She let out a long breath, her chest heavy. What unsettled her most wasn't just Daniel's behavior. It was how she felt. Every glance, every pause, every quiet word from him left her feeling things she wasn't supposed to. She reminded herself constantly he was her husband's son. And she had made promises, not only to her husband, but to herself. Yet her heart was betraying her, beating faster when Daniel was near. softening when she saw the look of care in his eyes. The tension was no longer just quiet, was alive, growing in ways neither of them could control. Carolyn lay awake in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. She remembered the way Daniel had told her not to carry heavy things. The seriousness in his voice, the way it had made her feel safe, almost cherished. She told herself it was just kindness, just a young man trying to help. But her heart knew better. The next morning, when she saw Daniel at the breakfast table, she noticed how carefully he kept his distance. He asked about her plans for the day, his tone polite, almost too formal. She answered just as politely, matching his carefulness. But beneath the calm words, both of them felt the same undercurrent to pull. Neither of them wanted to admit, but couldn't escape. Caroline excused herself soon after, retreating to the garden. She needed space. She needed air. She sat on the bench, staring at the flowers she had planted, wondering when everything had changed. It had started with a simple glance in the kitchen, but now it was so much more. She pressed her hands together, whispering to herself, "This is wrong. I can't let this happen." But the ache in her chest told her it already had. Daniel, from his bedroom window, saw her sitting there in the garden. He wanted to go to her, to say something, to end the silence that was suffocating them both. But he stayed where he was, his fists clenched at his sides. He knew if he stepped outside, he might say words he couldn't take back. And so, the silence continued unspoken, undeniable, and growing stronger with every passing day. The heat of late summer hung heavy in the air, and the house seemed quieter than usual. Caroline could feel if the tension between her and Daniel had grown into something almost tangible. It wasn't spoken, but it lingered in every glance, every accidental brush of hands, every quiet word exchanged. Both of them knew it was there, but neither dared confront it fully. One evening, a sudden storm cut the power to the house. Darkness filled the rooms, leaving only the soft flicker of candlelight. Caroline moved cautiously, lighting several candles in the living room. The shadows danced across the walls, casting shapes that seemed almost alive. She felt an unusual mix of unease and anticipation as she sank into the couch, wrapped in a light throe. She could hear the wind rattling the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. But it was the silence in the house that weighed heaviest. Footsteps approached, soft but certain. Daniel appeared in the doorway, hesitating for a moment before stepping into the candlelight. He held nothing, yet his presence carried a gravity that made Caroline's pulse quicken. They had been circling around their emotions for weeks now. The quiet tension, unspoken but undeniable. Tonight, it felt as though the air itself had charged, pressing them closer to a truth they both feared. He sat down across from her, careful not to sit too close, yet the proximity was enough to make her heart race. They didn't speak immediately. The only sound was the storm outside and the faint crackle of candle flames. Caroline's mind raced, trying to anticipate what he would say, wondering if she was ready to hear it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Daniel spoke. His voice was low, almost trembling, but it carried a sincerity that pulled at her. "Caroline, I don't know how to say this," he began, pausing to find the right words. I feel things I shouldn't around you. I don't want to disrespect you. I don't want to make things complicated, but I can't ignore it." Caroline's chest tightened. She had expected this moment, feared it, and yet, when it came, it hit her harder than she imagined. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, trying to remain calm. She didn't want to react too strongly, didn't want to give in to emotions that could spiral into something forbidden. Yet his words lingered in the air like a gentle storm. "It's impossible to dismiss." "You don't have to feel guilty, Daniel," she said softly, choosing her words carefully. "Feelings, they aren't something we can control. They come whether we want them to or not. What matters is what we do with them." He looked down, running a hand through his hair nervously. I don't want to make things wrong between us. I respect you. I respect Dad. It's confusing. I don't know what to do." Caroline felt a surge of empathy for him. He was so young, navigating emotions he had never faced before. She reached out instinctively, resting a hand briefly on his. He didn't pull away, though. He kept his eyes down, clearly struggling with the weight of his honesty. That single touch, fleeting as it was, made her heart ache with longing, but also with caution. She had to be careful for both their sakes. "You're not wrong for feeling this," she continued, her voice firm yet gentle. "It's natural to feel drawn to people. It doesn't mean you have to act on it. What matters is respect for yourself, respect for your family, and respect for boundaries." Daniel finally lifted his gaze, meeting hers with a mixture of fear and hope. His eyes searched hers, looking for judgment, forgiveness, understanding. Caroline held his gaze, offering the quiet reassurance he needed without compromising her own principles. She understood the confusion, the pull, the intensity of emotions that came with growing into adulthood. She had been there herself once, and though it was different, she knew the struggle of reconciling desire with what was right. The storm outside intensified. Lightning flashing briefly through the windows. The moment felt suspended in time, as if the world had shrunk down to just the two of them and the candlelight between them. Caroline could feel the depth of his honesty, the rawness of his admission, and she felt a wave of compassion, tinged with her own conflicted emotions. "I know it's difficult," she said finally, her voice softening. "We can't ignore feelings, but we can choose how we respond to them. We can acknowledge them without letting them control our actions. That's how we protect what matters most." Daniel nodded slowly, a mixture of relief and continued uncertainty in his expression. "I don't want to ruin anything. I don't want this to change how we live together, how I see you, how I see Dad." Caroline's heart swelled with the care he showed. He was honest, conscientious, and genuinely trying to navigate a path that would preserve their family. "Then we'll do this together," she whispered. "We'll be careful. We'll respect boundaries. And maybe, in time, these feelings will settle and we'll find peace." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the storm outside mirroring the quiet tension in the room. But now it wasn't charged with unspoken desire. Along it carried a sense of understanding. A tentative bridge between hearts that had felt so close, yet had always remained apart. They hadn't solved anything, but they had acknowledged it. And that was the first step toward clarity. Daniel finally stood, giving her a small, awkward smile. "Thank you for listening," he said. "For understanding?" Caroline nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. She wanted to say more, to reach out, to hold on to the fleeting intimacy of the moment, but she knew restraint was necessary. She couldn't let impulse undo the careful balance of their lives. Instead, she offered him a warm smile. "You're welcome. Remember, honesty is always better than pretending." As he left the room, Caroline sat back, letting the candlelight flicker across her face. The storm continued outside, but inside something had shifted. The tension remained, but now it carried a new dimension: acknowledged feelings, careful understanding, and a promise, silent but strong, that they would navigate this together without crossing the line. Her heart was heavy, and yet strangely light. The unspoken attraction, the awkward honesty, the mutual respect, it all combined into a moment she would remember, a memory that was bittersweet but necessary. It was a turning point, a night where emotions had been laid bare, where honesty had replaced confusion, and where both Caroline and Daniel had taken the first careful step toward understanding their own hearts. And though the summer storm raged outside, inside in the candlelit room, a quiet calm settled. They hadn't solved everything, but they had faced the truth, and sometimes facing the truth was the hardest and most meaningful step of all. The morning after the storm, the house felt different. The air was lighter, yet charged with unspoken emotions. Carolyn moved quietly through the kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the counters. The melons she had bought weeks ago still sat neatly arranged. A simple reminder of how the first glance in the kitchen had sparked something neither she nor Daniel could ignore. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. Daniel entered the kitchen soon after, carrying a cup of coffee. He glanced at her, their eyes meeting for a brief moment, and Carolyn felt the familiar flutter in her chest. She quickly looked away, forcing herself to focus on pouring cream into her own cup. The tension from the previous night's storm had not disappeared. It had shifted, becoming quieter but no less present. "Good morning," Daniel said softly, careful not to let his tone betray anything. Caroline returned the greeting, her voice steady, though inside she was anything but. There was a weight to this morning, an awareness of the delicate balance they had to maintain. Every movement, every glance, every word carried a significance. Neither wanted to acknowledge openly. Caroline set her coffee down and leaned against the counter, studying the melons for a moment as if drawing courage from the simplicity of the fruit. She remembered the first day, the way Daniel had looked at her. And she realized how far the tension had grown in just a few weeks. It wasn't just about glances or awkward moments anymore. It was about feelings, undeniable and confusing, and the responsibility she carried to protect her family and herself. Daniel approached cautiously, his footsteps quiet on the hardwood floor. He stood near the counter, watching her without speaking, his eyes full of questions he wasn't ready to voice. Carolyn sensed his internal struggle and felt a pang of empathy. He was honest, brave, even for admitting what he had felt the night of the storm. Yet now, in the daylight, those feelings needed to be managed, tempered by reason and care. "You don't have to worry," Carolyn said finally, her voice soft but firm. "We both know what we need to do. We respect each other and we respect the family. That has to come first." Daniel nodded, swallowing, his gaze still fixed on the counter. "I know," he said quietly. "It's just hard sometimes. I feel like my heart wants to do one thing, but my mind knows what's right. I don't want to make things complicated." Caroline smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and sadness in her eyes. She understood perfectly. Life often demanded that people suppress feelings, even when those feelings were natural, even when they made the heart ache. "It's okay to feel," she told him, "but what matters is how we handle it. What matters is choice, and you're choosing wisely." The morning passed in a quiet rhythm, both of them moving around the kitchen, preparing breakfast, each action a test of self-control. Caroline felt a strange mix of relief and longing. Relief because Daniel's maturity and honesty allowed them to coexist without crossing boundaries, and longing because the unspoken attraction still lingered, stubborn and persistent in the spaces between them. After breakfast, Daniel left the kitchen to tackle chores outside. Caroline watched him through the window, noticing the way he moved with purpose and care. She remembered the garden scene from a few days ago, how he had insisted on helping without being asked. She realized then that these small gestures, his thoughtfulness, his attentiveness, his quiet presence were what had drawn her heart, even as she fought to keep it guarded, Dot alone in the kitchen. Caroline leaned against the counter, reflecting on the past weeks. The feelings she and Daniel had experienced weren't something they could act on. Yet they had changed something fundamental in both of them. There was a tension, yes, but also a new understanding, a recognition of each other's integrity and restraint. Their bond had deepened, built not on impulse, but on honesty, on respect, on shared awareness of what must remain unspoken. Later that day, Daniel returned from outside, wiping sweat from his brow. He paused at the doorway, his eyes meeting hers briefly. Caroline felt the same flutter in her chest, the same rush of emotions, but now tempered with clarity. She nodded at him gently, silently acknowledging the mutual understanding that had grown between them. "I'll give you space," Daniel said softly, a hint of relief in his tone. "I don't want to make this harder for you or for myself." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes, though she blinked them away. She understood perfectly. It wasn't about denying feelings. It was about channeling them appropriately, about choosing family, stability, and integrity over fleeting desire. She offered him a warm, quiet smile. "Thank you, Daniel. That means a lot, and I appreciate your honesty. It's not easy to feel one thing and do another, but you're handling it with maturity." The day unfolded with ordinary activities, lunch preparation, tidying the house, small conversations about mundane things, but beneath the surface, the emotional undercurrent persisted. It was no longer dangerous or chaotic. It had become a quiet, unspoken connection that reminded them both of their humanity, their capacity for care, and the boundaries they were committed to upholding that evening. As the sun dipped low, painting the kitchen in warm golden hues, Carolyn found herself alone again. She picked up one of the melons, running her fingers over its smooth surface. The first glance in the kitchen came to mind the moment that had set everything in motion. She realized that attraction, unspoken longing, and emotional intensity were a natural part of life, but they didn't have to define actions or relationships. What mattered most was choice. Daniel appeared in the doorway again, quietly observing her. He didn't speak. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, the silence carried more meaning than words ever could. Caroline nodded subtly, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken promise they shared, to honor boundaries, to protect family, and to respect the delicate balance between heart and mind. As Daniel left the room, Caroline felt a strange mix of sorrow and peace. Sorrow for the feelings that could not be acted upon, and peace in knowing that restraint, honesty, and respect had preserved what truly mattered. The connection between them had not disappeared. It had transformed into something more enduring, more meaningful, and ultimately safer for both their hearts. That night, Caroline lay in bed, reflecting on the summer that had changed everything. It began with a simple glance, a small moment of tension, and had grown into a complex web of emotions neither could deny. Yet, through honesty, respect, and careful choice, they had navigated the storm together. Their hearts had been tested, their boundaries clarified, and their understanding deepened in the quiet of the house. Caroline understood that love and care were not always about acting on every feeling. Sometimes the truest love was shown in restraint, in protecting what mattered most, and in choosing family and integrity over fleeting desires. And though the summer would be remembered for its emotional intensity, it would also be remembered for the quiet courage it had taught them both. The world outside had returned to its normal rhythm, but inside, both Caroline and Daniel carried a memory of that summer of honesty, tension, and unspoken understanding that would remain with them forever. They had learned that hearts could be stirred, emotions could awaken, but choices defined who they were and what they would become. In that choice, they found strength, clarity, and a deeper connection that transcended mere attraction. Then the summer ended with a sense of resolution, not in dramatic gestures, but in quiet, heartfelt acknowledgement, a story of feelings acknowledged, boundaries respected, and hearts forever touched by moments that would never be spoken aloud, yet never forgotten.